Okay, so welcome. We are having our next session, second session, on the subject of Jewish mythology surrounding heaven, hell, and also the angel of death. And this is from a book called Tree of Souls by Howard Schwartz. And he is sort of the dean of books about Jewish mythology. And I once heard him speak, and that's how I kind of got into this. And these are myths from all kinds of sources. Well, like most things in Judaism, they may well start in the Bible with a reference, sometimes very oblique and tangential, and then picked up perhaps in Talmud and other midrash and other medieval and other commentaries. And it was funny when I first taught this class, and Jay would be there, and he would be always asking a question: "Who wrote this? And do I have to believe it?" So I think I had 2 or 3 slides that says, "No, you don't have to believe this. These are myths. They are, I think I find them very interesting, and they don't even necessarily agree with one another, as we will see. So it's not as though this is like a catechism of here are the official statements and belief of Judaism, and to be a good Jew, you need to subscribe to them. Nothing could be further from the case with regard to these myths. As I say till I am blue in the face, Judaism focuses on what you should do, Jewish laws and traditions. And in some cases, as we'll see, some of the traditions actually stem from these myths, and the traditions have become part of Jewish law, and they may well have their foundations in some of this mythology. So I know we had a class last time. Any comments before we dive back into some of these texts? Okay, well, seeing none, I will go to share screen. And, actually, after having done the class last week, I actually feel a little bit better about repeating this, because I know I went through a lot of this material a few years ago. But when I went through the material a few years ago, I felt the need to go through it rather quickly. And so the difference, and really the difference between having a class on this material, I know there's somebody in this class, in the Temple of Dad Elohim kind of men's Torah study group, who doesn't come very often. And he said, "You send us the articles, we can read them. Why do I need to attend the class?" And for me, I hope that part of the class is the discussion among us and sort of, going down various tangents, which, as you know, one of my favorite subjects. So I think I'm gonna read these texts, so I can sort of interrupt myself and offer some background, but feel free, to raise your hands or just jump in. We have a pretty small group. So we actually talked about this. We've talked about this a few times. Sabbath and Gehenna. Remembering that Gehenna is a place, I would say it's closest to the Catholic idea of purgatory. It's a place where your soul goes, according to these myths, to pay for sins. And we started talking about it last week. And as we'll see, you're there for a limited amount of time, except for certain sins in which you could be there for eternity. Not really mentioned at all in the Hebrew Bible. The word Gehenna is not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. It actually comes from a valley where the tradition was to sacrifice children to a fire god, literally by burning them alive, which of course the rabbis picked up as a place that would be representative of hell. Bryce.
Yeah, just as a question, do you, and I don't expect that you know it, but maybe you have spoken with some of your Christian fellow theologians about this. Do we know if the Christian ideals of or ideas of hell and purgatory, if they have an origin in Jewish text?
I don't know. I sort of doubt it, because I don't think Christians and Christianity have paid much attention to these post-biblical texts. And there are there's some New Testament material about Jesus going to Sheol. So that's actually in Christian biblical material. And I don't know what other material is in there. You know, Erwin reminds us again of Dante's Inferno from time to time. So there's a lot of thought given. So there's a lot of Christian thought. I would be surprised if there's a lot of direct connection with Jewish sources, but I don't know. It's a very good question.
On the other hand, is it possible that there is a connection from the Christian sources to the Jewish rabbinic ideas?
Yeah, I would actually, again, without any specific information, I would say that's very likely, just from the standpoint of when Jews lived under other cultures, Christian and Muslim, that there has always been a significant impact of the thought of the majority culture sort of creeping into Jewish thought. So that's actually probably more likely. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and that.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. So Sabbath in Gehenna. Even the wicked in Gehenna enjoy a respite on the Sabbath. Every Sabbath eve, when the day becomes sanctified, the angel in charge of souls announces, "Let the punishment of sinners cease, for the Holy King approaches, and the day is about to be sanctified. He protects all." Instantly, all punishment ceases, and the guilty have a respite. The sinners who observe the Sabbath are led to two mountains of snow, where they remain until the end of the Sabbath. When the angel in charge of the spirits shouts, "All evildoers back to Gehenna, the Sabbath is over," and they are thrust back to their former place in hell. Some of them, however, take snow with them to cool them during the 6 days of the week. But God says to them, "Woe to you who steal even in hell." But the fires of Gehenna do not come to a halt for those who never observed the Sabbath. Since they didn't observe the Sabbath before, they have no respite. I've never actually heard a rabbi speaking about this as a a way of encouraging folks to obey the Sabbath. What's unclear to me, and I guess I would have to go back to these sources, and I don't have access to all of them, but some I do. Is it's unclear to me whether punishment ceases for everyone, and only people who are Sabbath observant get to leave. So let's say the non-Sabbath observant folks stay in Gehenna, but with the fire still burning, but the punishment ceases. I really don't know, and I don't know if the sources have that level of detail.
Rabbi,
yes, go ahead.
I would like to ask you, I am pretty sure, I don't know if you know Dan Brown's book.
Yes.
And one of the books are that this one of the priests commit sins like murdering other people, and he doesn't want to go to hell, so he does, I don't know if I say it correctly, flagellation.
Yeah, flagellation, yes.
Yeah, so he doesn't go to hell.
Well, he hopes he doesn't go to hell. I mean, I've read all of Dan Brown's book, and I enjoy them. I always understand them to be fiction, and I think some people forget that. But I don't remember that the story, actually goes into whether he goes to hell or not. But yeah, I think so there is that idea. Flagellation for repentance, that is actually specifically prohibited in the Torah for Jews. I forgot, I was going to make another comment, but Bryce, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't say this as a means to make an objection or a criticism, only to offer my own perplexity. The thing that I've never been able to understand, I'm not even asking you to explain it or justify it, but the thing that I cannot for the life of me understand would be the purpose in punishing people after they are dead and cannot change.
Yeah, you
All
actually
right.
raised this. I think
I may have done that before, and I'm getting old, so I may not remember that I did it before.
okay, so let me address it. And
Oh,
and the
all right.
reason
You want?
the reason is justice. So, and also, hold on. You're asking a question. I'm giving
Sure,
you the answer.
sure.
I'm not
I'm listening.
insisting that you agree with the answer, but
Okay.
the justice. And if you believe, I always talk about beliefs in terms of how does your belief in X, Y, or Z affect your current life? And so I'll offer a couple of ideas. First, just justice. If justice doesn't take place in this world and God is just, then justice must take place somewhere else. The second is, and I do believe this is true and actually works, that if people really believe that they will be punished for sins that they commit in this life, in the next life or eternity, that may cause them to live a better life in this life. And so I think that's a pretty simple explanation. And then of course the mystics who would hold with the idea of reincarnation would say you pay for your sins in Gehenna, and then you come back into this world as a new soul, having been cleansed of those sins. So I would say those are the three ideas with which you may agree or not agree. But
Well, it's not a matter of agreeing or not agreeing so much as to see if they are in fact addressed, if those answers actually address my objection. My objection really is that you punish a child, you don't punish a child by killing them. You punish a child
right.
in order to correct behavior so that they behave differently a little later.
Right.
Punishment isn't final.
No, I think your objection is clear.
Yeah, no, and I understand that, and I
Yeah,
don't
and I
think
would
any
say,
of those three things actually addressed it, but I'll leave it there.
yeah, and okay, so I think the fear of punishment can have an effect on how you live this life. But you're right.
I understand, but that doesn't have anything to do with the question of why God would institute a system whereby he punished people after they couldn't change. That was
Right.
my only objection.
Okay.
Those things that you mentioned don't address that.
Well, except for the last one, if your soul in the next life can change and be better. Anyway,
But if you don't remember it, then how could you?
okay, no objection. No response to that. Okay, let's continue. So this is a fun one that I enjoy sharing with people at Havdalah. Why do we smell Aramaic spices, besamim, at Havdalah? And this is actually from a Chabad website. And there are many things that compete in my mind for the most obscure things I have learned about Judaism, but this is up there. I don't think I've ever said this to anyone in my range of friends who has ever heard it before. So, getting rid of the stench of hell. Although the loss of an extra soul is the main reason for smelling the fragrance on Motzei Shabbat, there are other reasons given as well. Motzei means the leaving, like Ilu Hotzionu mi Mitzrayim. God takes us out of Egypt, leaving Egypt. This is the same root in Hebrew, leaving Shabbat. And I should mention the main reason. There is a tradition which you will often hear from me and other folks at Havdalah. But first of all, just be sure everyone understands there's a ceremony about leaving the Sabbath. At sunset, traditionally, at least an hour, I would say, after sunset, the tradition is at a time in which you can see 3 stars. And I don't know what you do on a cloudy night, so don't ask me. Except there are lists published about when you do this. You have a ceremony leaving upon leaving Shabbat, and we extinguish a candle instead of lighting a candle, but we smell spices. And the classic story about this is that the idea that on the Sabbath you get an extra soul, a neshama yetera, an additional soul, a Sabbath soul, and there's stories about how this poor soul, if you know, if at the end of Shabbat the person has studied Torah and observed the Sabbath, that soul goes back, you know, to the galaxy of souls, and they can brag about what a great time they have had on the Shabbat. And the poor soul that's been dragged along to work and you know and so on, they, you know, they don't have as much to be happy about. But the idea is, as this soul leaves you, you are refreshed by smelling the spices. So here's another reason. At the onset of Shabbat, the fires of hell are extinguished, and the souls that are there get a bit of rest. At the conclusion of Shabbat, the fires are reignited, and the soul can sometimes feel a weakness or depression coming over it as it catches a whiff of the stench emanating from hell. Therefore, we smell the besamim, the spices, to give the soul strength. Some explain that this reason really comes together with the loss of the extra soul, for the reason why the soul is more susceptible to depression is that it has already suffered a loss. So this is a bit of arcane minutia.
So we're supposed to give everybody Zoloft in Gehenna?
Zoloft in Gehenna. I think that's the name of your next poem, Cheryl.
Right.
And if you don't do it, I'll have to write a song. Zoloft in Gehenna. I like it. Okay, so let's talk about the Messiah in hell. And this actually gives you, boy, I'm not familiar with the sources, but it gives you a sense of Messiah that you won't hear from more rational sources. When Rabbi Joshua ben Levi found himself in the Garden of Eden, he decided to explore it as completely as he could. One by one, he explored the 9 palaces of the Garden of Eden until he came to the palace of the Messiah. He recognized the Messiah by the splendor of his aura. There he saw how the patriarchs and the kings came to the Messiah every Sabbath and holy day and wept because it was not yet time for him to go forth into the world. When Rabbi Joshua came before the Messiah said, "How are my children faring?" And Rabbi Joshua said, "Every day they await you." Then the Messiah gave a great sigh and wept. So I think this is an insight into the Messiah, which is very easy for us rationalists to overlook. When I talk particularly to Christians about Messiah, I have, you know, a pretty simple explanation. The English word Messiah is a translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means anointed. The Messiah is simply a king of Israel. Every king of Israel is anointed by having holy oil poured on his head. I think the word Messiah appears, you know, dozens of times in the Hebrew Bible. The word Mashiach appears dozens of times in the Hebrew Bible, but there is nothing supernatural, superhuman, certainly not God or an aspect of God about the Messiah. But as you'll see in this mythology, the Messiah is somehow sitting and waiting at the top of 9 palaces in the Garden of Eden. So there is mythology about this Messiah that is awaited, certainly not all of the kings of Israel that have come and gone, but this particular Messiah who we're waiting for. So I just think it's important to acknowledge that in Jewish mythology, we do have fairly, I would say, exotic concepts about Messiah. So after that, the Messiah showed Rabbi Joshua all of the earthly garden and the heavenly one as well, and revealed the great mysteries to him. But when Rabbi Joshua asked to be shown hell, at first the Messiah refused, for the righteous are not permitted to behold hell. But when Rabbi Joshua told him that it was his intention to measure hell from beginning to end, the Messiah agreed to take him there. So it was that Rabbi Joshua followed the Messiah until they reached the fiery gates of hell. When the angels guarding the gate saw that the Messiah was with him, they admitted him at once. Everywhere they went, Rabbi Joshua saw the punishments of hell, where avenging angels smite the wicked with flaming rods and throw them into fiery pits. and after that hang them by their tongues or by the organs with which they committed adultery. And although Rabbi Joshua tried to measure the compartments of hell, he found that they were boundless, as was the suffering of the wicked. But whenever the wicked in hell saw the light of the Messiah, and they rejoiced and cried out, "There is the one who will bring us out of here." So pretty wild and fanciful stuff. And again, there are, you know, responding to Bryce's thought, there are stories of Jesus descending into Sheol, and I don't remember the stories. You know, it's too bad I don't have some of my Christian scholars here. But that may well be an influence on these stories developing. Yeah, I point out often in the Zohar itself, the Zohar, of course, according to traditional sources, Zohar, which is the central text of Jewish mysticism, and is said to be, you know, written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is a 2nd or 3rd century Common Era, you know, Mishnaic rabbi. But scholars believe it was written in the 12th century in Spain. And in broad strokes, the Zohar is about a mystical leader, Shimon Bar Yochai, traveling the Galilee with his disciples. And that should make that, that should remind you of that other rabbi who traveled the Galilee with his disciples. And of course, in the 12th century in Spain, this was the time of emerging horrific Catholic anti-Semitism. So I have no doubt that influenced this whole idea, sort of the narrative impetus behind the Zohar. So I think Bryce, I think that thought is right on the shekel. Okay, let's continue. Purified souls. When the process of purification has been completed, the chief angels take a soul out of Gehenna and lead it to the gate of paradise. There they say to the angels standing guard, this soul was broken after its ordeal in the infernal fire, and now has come to you pure and white. Then God causes the sun to penetrate the firmament and shed its rays on that soul and heal it. So this is from the Zohar, and here is Professor Schwartz's commentary. The purpose of Gehenna is to purify the souls of sinners so they can be permitted to enter paradise. This myth demonstrates how a soul is taken out of Gehenna. Note the purification process is clearly described as a painful one, where the soul is purified in the fires of Gehenna. And that actually sheds a different light for me, Bryce, on your question, which I think is a reasonable one, is does the punishments in Gehenna lead to an improvement of behavior in this world? But with this myth, which is Zohar, is really focusing on, I guess, the justice aspect. So the soul has sinned, it pays for its sins, and then can enter paradise, as though it had few sins or no sins at all. But it's not about behavior in this world. And so that's part of this sort of mythological structure, which you're muted, Bryce. I don't know if you're commenting on that.
It makes a lot of sense because from what you've described to us before many times about the Zohar, was that, these folks have great precision, and they have a great love of pattern and of symmetry. And so they have created as many symmetrical situations as they can out of the patterns that they find. And this is entirely consistent.
By these people, you're talking about the authors of Zohar.
The authors of the Zohar,
yeah,
yes.
okay,
And those who are very, I don't feel comfortable calling them Zoharians.
We'd call them Kabbalists.
Kabbalists, yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, that's who I mean, the Kabbalists.
Okay,
yes.
Great.
But Rabbi,
yes.
how you call it? Israel Levine, who is teaching Kabbalah at Chabad always told us that you should not even attempt to read or study Zohar till you pass your middle age, because it is
You're
so
40.
difficult to understand and it's so confusing.
Yeah, so when I teach about Kabbalah, the tradition was you need to be in middle age, you need to be married and have children, and that was a certain amount of maturity, and also I remember learning that so that you wouldn't resist the temptation just to leave home and spend your life in meditation and contemplation of Zohar, because if you have a wife and children, you have demands that are earthly and not, supernal. And there's also that you be of good ethical standing. And the tradition was that you study one student to one teacher, because it is so confusing and it's so easy to be misunderstood. Clearly, the way I studied Zohar and the Stohar and Kabbalah that I study with others, we're not come close to meeting those standards. Henry.
Yeah, I may be way off, but last time there was the concept of the period of mourning, and you mourn and you pray for the people that have passed on for the 11th month period, and then they go to paradise, and you were talking about, we were reading here about Gehenna to paradise. Is that kind of the same?
Yes. So again,
connection.
the concept is that you only spend 12 months in Gehenna, and the theory is, I'm just taking a quick look at some of the chat. Boy, there's a lot in chat, so I'm not going to try and digest it right now. The theory is you spend a maximum of 12 months in Gehenna, and that there's a lot of legends about a child reciting Kaddish for a parent comforts the parent in Gehenna and may actually even help reduce the amount of time they spend in Gehenna. And that mitzvot that you do in honor of a parent, like, you donate something to charity and in memory of and in honor of. And so you get credit for that and the parent gets credit for that. And then presumably after the 12 months, they go on to Gan Eden. And then there's different levels of Gan Eden. So continuing to say Kaddish during Yizkor, which is 4 times a year, and on Yortzeit, which is once a year, help their ascent of their soul to higher levels in Gan Eden. That's my understanding of that idea. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Okay, how the dead see the dead. The day a person dies is the day of judgment, when his soul parts from the body. A person does not leave this world until he sees the Shekhinah. Let me just want to look at the sources. So this is Sifrei, this is a midrash on Deuteronomy, and then it's also in Zohar. So he doesn't leave the world until he sees the Shekhinah, accompanied by 3 ministering angels who receive the soul of a righteous person. The angels examine a person's deeds and insist that a person confess to all that the body has done with the soul in this world. After this confession, the soul of a righteous person rejoices in its parting from this world and looks forward with delight to the world to come. For when God takes the souls of the righteous, he takes it with gentleness. For when he takes the souls of the wicked, he does so through cruel angels, as it is said, therefore a cruel angel will be sent against him. Book of Proverbs. After a man dies, he can be seen by all others who are dead. To each of them, he appears as they last saw him alive. Some see him as a youth, others as an old man. For the angel who guards the dead makes his soul assume these various forms so that all should recognize him by seeing him just as they saw him in life. However, if a man is condemned to punishment in Gehenna, he is enveloped by smoke and brimstone, so that none of those being punished can see the punishment of any other. Therefore, none are put to shame except those who have put others to shame. So, it's kind of interesting details. I often say when I read about this, don't ask me how they know this. I don't have the foggiest idea, but I suspect if I track down these sources, I could at least follow the logic. I like the idea that you appear, if after my passing I appear to my grandmother, I suspect she wouldn't recognize me with gray hair and, in my 70s. But she would see me as, when she knew me, as probably a teenager. I can't remember exactly how old I was when my grandparents passed. And I also like the idea that the concept of not shaming someone even applies in Gehenna, that other souls that might recognize you in Gehenna can't see the punishments that you're going through because that would put you to shame. Chris.
Yeah, so I'm wondering what it says, if someone is condemned to punishment in Gehenna, is there like a clear sense or a clear teaching for what would qualify you for Gehenna versus not?
So the only time I've ever heard that discussed is there are some sins which would merit eternity in Gehenna. And those are some sexual sins, I think adultery, and publicly shaming someone else, and specifically calling people by demeaning names, which, of all the things you can do, it would seem that's an odd one, at least in one source. But, in theory, I guess you could argue, or one might expect, that any sin you create in your life would be paid for in Gehenna. I actually don't know the details on that, but yeah, you had pepperoni pizza. That adds, as long as it takes to digest a pepperoni pizza. This is my own Kabbalistic insight as to how long you spend in Gehenna for eating pepperoni pizza, but I don't know, and I've never heard that discussed.
Is there an idea that, like, if you're really, really righteous, you might just skip it altogether?
I've actually never heard that. And that's why no matter how righteous you are, your children still say Kaddish for 11 months. And there is actually this is only slightly related. They say your position in heaven, in Gan Eden, whether it's high or low, great palace, crummy palace, is higher for those who have sinned and repented than for those who have never sinned at all. So this is, again, the rabbis sort of praising as much as they possibly can the idea of teshuvah, of repentance. But I've never, it'd be interesting to know. I mean, there are supposedly, I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of the Lamed Vavniks. Lamed Vav are two Hebrew letters, and they have a numerical value of 36. Just like Chai is 18, Chet Yud is 18, Lamed Vav is 36. So there's a concept called the Lamed Vavniks, which says that in any generation, there are 36, and presumably only 36, perfectly righteous people, Jews, I think Jews, in the world. And they don't know who they are. So I don't know if the Lamed Vavniks would be exempt from Sheol. But yeah, it's a great question. I've never seen anything written on it. I will answer with that level of precision. I'm not saying there isn't, but I am saying that I've never encountered it, and that it is a very good question. Let's see. Okay, we're up to the next one. Okay, so yeah, I think we'll be able to finish with the angel of death. There's a couple of myths I have to share about the angel of death, including this sort of image. And another image of the angel of death. This actually, now that I look at it, yeah. So we have this myth for Passover, right? That although I think the text says God passed over, but most of us hear stories. I know I've always heard stories that it was the angel of death that passed over the homes of the Israelites. I'm wondering what these folks are doing, but they're having a Seder, and I notice, on the doorpost there's blood smeared. So here's the angel of death at the door. So I have a couple of myths about the angel of death. The creation of the angel of death, and this is actually from the Talmud, from Midrash, a whole bunch of Midrash. Yeah, Talmud, Midrash, and Zohar. Some say that the only thing created on the first day of creation was the angel of death. How do we know this? By the word darkness. In the verse, darkness was over the face of the deep. But others say that when God created the world, there was no angel of death. So when was the angel of death created? Some say it was at the time of the sin of Adam and Eve, for the serpent was the angel of death, and it caused death for the entire world. But others say that the angel of death did not come into being until Cain slew Abel, for until then no one had died, and there was no need for such an angel. Then God transformed Cain into the angel of death as punishment for having slain his brother, and that is how the angel of death came into being. Cain served as the angel of death for 130 years, wandering and roaming about accursed. After the death of Cain, Lamech took his place as the angel of death. So you have all these different sources, and no doubt they have different ideas. Rabbi Low and the angel of death. Rabbi Low is, I can't remember what century, but this is the rabbi of Prague that builds the Golem. I think 13th, 14th, 15th century, it's kind of Middle Ages. One night, not long before the holy days were to begin, Rabbi Low glimpsed a light in the synagogue across the way, and he wondered who might be there at that hour. He left his house, and as he approached the synagogue, he saw through the window a strange figure standing at the pulpit. The closer Rabbi Low came, the more sinister did the figure seem, and suddenly Rabbi Low realized who it was, the angel of death. And at the same time, he came close enough to see the angel sharpening a knife over a long scroll on which many names were written. Rabbi Low was pierced with terror and resisted a powerful impulse to run away. But a moment later, he became calm and self-possessed, and he knew what he had to do. As silently as possible, he opened the door of the synagogue and came up behind the dreaded angel. All at once, he snatched the long list out of the angel's hands, tearing it away from him, and ran from the synagogue to his home, where he threw the list into the flames and watched until every scrap of it had burned to ashes. Now the plague, this is continuing the same story. Now the plague had begun to spread in the city, and that was the list of victims the angel of death had come to take in one fell swoop. Now only those on the piece of the list left in his hands, the angel of death's hands, fell victim to him. All the rest were spared. But among those on the list was Rabbi Low, and it was he above all whom the angel of death was determined to capture. Rabbi Low could read the lines of the future, knew that the angel would try and snatch him to seek revenge. But Rabbi Low used his powers to avoid the angel, much as King David had done, studying Torah day and night. For the angel of death is forbidden to take a man when he is engaged in the study of Torah. Yet even so, the angel found a ruse by which to capture him. He hid in a rose of great beauty that grew in the garden of Rabbi Low's grandson. One day, the boy picked the rose as a gift for his grandfather, and as he held it in his hands to present to Rabbi Low, the rabbi perceived the presence of the dark angel hidden in the rose. Then he did not hesitate, but accepted the gift from his grandson, for he knew if he did not take it, the boy's life would be in danger. But no sooner did Rabbi Low take it in his hand that the angel of death struck him like a serpent and snatched his soul. A major study of the legends of the angel of death was undertaken by Chaim Schwartzbaum in the last years of his life. Professor Dov Noy tells the story that he once asked Schwartzbaum, why was it taking him so long to finish his book on the angel of death? Schwartzbaum replied that he believed the angel of death would prefer to take him after he finished the book, and that is why he was taking his time. Unfortunately, he died before the book was completed. So, so now we're going to talk about the angel of conception and the angel of death. It's a good thing we're not in Florida, because I'm not certain we can even discuss the angel of conception in Florida. I'll have to double check that. Among the angels, there is one who serves as the midwife of souls. This is Lila, the angel of conception. When the time comes for a man and his wife to conceive a child, God directs Lila to seek out a certain soul hidden in the Garden of Eden and to command it to enter a drop of semen. At first, the soul refuses, for it still remembers the pain of being born and prefers to remain pure. But Lila compels the soul to obey, and that is when God decrees what the fate of that sperm will be, whether it will be male or female, strong or weak, rich or poor, and so on. Then the angel turns around and places the soul in the womb of the mother. When the angel grows in the womb, Lila places a lighted candle at the head of the unborn infant, so he can see from one end of the world to the other. As it is said, his lamp shone above my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, from the book of Job. For 9 months, Lila watches over the unborn infant, teaching him the entire Torah, as well as the history of his soul. During this time, the evil inclination has no power over him. And before he is born, he is given an oath to keep his soul pure, lest God take it back from him. Then Lila leads the child into the Garden of Eden and shows him the righteous ones with crowns on their heads. So does Lila lead the child to the netherworld and show him the punishments of Gehenna. But when the time has come to be born, the angel extinguishes the lamp and brings forth the child into the world. The instant the child emerges, Lila lightly strikes the newborn above the lip, causing it to cry out, and at that instant the infant forgets all it has learned. That is the origin of the mark on the upper lip which everyone bears. Indeed, Lila is a guardian angel who watches over the child all of his days, and when the time has come to take leave of the world, it is Lila who comes to him and says, "Do you not recognize me? The time of your departure has come. I have come to take you from this world." Thereupon Lila leads him to the world to come, where he renders an accounting before God and is judged according to his merits. And I know the information about the sources is limited, but there's a lot of them. And here is the philtrum, touched by an angel. That's my own little commentary on the philtrum. I don't know if you know, but this little part of your body actually has a name, and there it is. I think I'm not going to read this. But, well, maybe.
Well, Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
what happens if somebody has a cleft lip? The angel missed the spot?
You will have to take that one up with the Holy One.
Okay.
Sorry. Erwin, that's one of my God knows responses. Oh, I don't even know what happened here. Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit. We have some time. So CCR Responsa 1932 about not naming a child after a living relative. And I haven't read this responsum in a while. I think it explains some of the superstition. One of these superstitions, I think this is, yeah, okay. One of these superstitions was that due to the carelessness of the angel of death, harm may come to a child named after an older living person. As you probably know, in Ashkenazi tradition, definitely not in Sephardic tradition, you do not name a child after a living person. For when the time comes for that older person to die, the angel of death, receiving instructions to take the life of the older person by that name, might instead take the life of the younger person of the same name. This belief in a possible mistake on the part of the angel of death, which we have found expressed in the story in the Talmud, in Chagiga, was cited above, was especially current and strongly believed in among the Ashkenazi Jews. This is evident from the following story told in the Sefer Hasidim. An older teacher and a young student happened to get married in the same week. The young student died during the very week of the wedding. In a dream that appeared to his mother, and in a dream he appeared, to his mother and told her that he actually had many years to live, but his untimely death was brought about by a mistake on the part of the angel of death. The latter, the angel of death, received an order to take the life of the bridegroom who got married during that week. Of course, the order referred to the older teacher who had also been married during the same week, but the angel of death did not understand the order correctly. And so when he met the young student bridegroom alone on the street, he thought the order for the bridegroom of the week referred to him, and so he killed him. The story goes on to tell all the years which had been allotted to the young student and which he had not lived within by another mistake of the heavenly clerks assigned to the old teacher, thus prolonging his life. Finding on their records that the bridegroom who got married that week, referring to the young student, had many years to live, and finding only one living bridegroom who got married that week, the old teacher, they accordingly credited his account with that number of years. There is no doubt that out of consideration for the safety of the child, and as a precaution against possible danger resulting from mistakes on the part of the angel of death, they avoided naming the child after a living father or grandfather, or, as was the custom in some places, after any living person. And it was not only the fear of the death of the child, but also fear of sickness or other punishment that might be decreed against an older person, and which the angel charged with the execution of that decree might by mistake inflict upon the child having the same name. For the angel of death is not the only one among the angels that are stupid and careless. The other heavenly officers are not much smarter and no more careful than he. The belief that a change in name affects a change in the status was strongly developed and almost generally accepted in Talmudic times because of the connection with or the support is derived from the other notion generally accepted in Talmudic times, namely the fallibility of the spirits. It was believed that if a person was called by another name, the spirits, angels, or demons who look for him under his old name cannot find him. For under the new name, they imagine him to be another person, a person about which they have no orders against. They have no order or against whom they have no grudge or charge. Thus, to escape danger from demons, it was considered an effective protection for husband and wife to exchange their names. He called himself by her name and she by his. The demon who might seek to harm the gentleman would find a person who, judging by his name, was a lady, whom they would refrain from harming. Likewise, the demons who might pursue the lady would give up their evil designs if they should find instead of the lady, a person who, as the new name indicates, a gentleman. I've never heard of this actually happening. The Talmud describes the practice of exchanging the names as a heathen, stupid superstition and is inclined to object to it. Yet the Talmud considers it a perfectly good Jewish belief that by change of name, one might escape the punishment decreed against him by a heavenly court. There are 4 procedures by which a person may cause the evil decree against him to be torn and destroyed, says the Baraita in the Talmud, and one of them is changing a person's name. Some people say a change of place or residence may have the same effect. I think, yeah, that's the end of this discussion. So I'll make a couple of comments on the name changing bit. I think most of you know that certainly in the Ashkenazi world, you don't name someone after a living person. In fact, there's a Yiddish curse which says, "May someone be named after you and soon." In the Sephardic world, it's exactly the opposite. The Sephardic never got into this particular superstition. I was just discussing this with Sonia actually a few hours ago. And, you know, when she had children and when her cousins have children, it was expected they would be named after a grandparent. And so you'd have lots of kids, certainly with the Hebrew name of the grandparent. I think I saw, I can't remember where I saw this, but the idea that we know that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, were Ashkenazi because if they were Sephardic, they would have been Abraham, Isaac, and Abraham, which I thought
Oh.
was kind of funny.
Rabbi,
And I'll mention one other practice, and then I'll open up the discussion, which they refer to in this responsum, and that is that there's also a tradition of changing your name, of someone changing their name when they're very ill. And this, I hear about of, let's say, someone's named Moshe, and he gets very, very ill, and so he will change his name and there's an official proceeding. I once looked this up because somebody asked me to do it. Change his name from male to Chaim, which means life, or Chaya, same meaning for a woman. And so again, the idea is the angel of death is not terribly bright, is looking for Moshe and can't find Moshe. The guy in bed, at the address he's been given is named Chaim, so he would be fooled and then not take the person's life. Erwin.
Yeah, I have two remarks. My father's name was Avram, and my name is Yitzhak ben Abraham. So, my father's name is within my name.
Oh, yes, you're absolute. Well, was your father alive when you were born?
Yeah, sure.
So, but okay, now I'm confused. So, but you weren't, your name is Yitzchak. You
Yes.
always have, sorry, I got on the wrong track. You always have your parents' name as part of your name. So my Hebrew name is Moshe ben Chonon V'Kroisha, but my name is Moshe, and I remember my grandmother telling me that I was named after her father. But you're always the son of, and presumably your parents survived your birth. So you're yes, that it's a good point. Thank you for clarifying.
And the other thing unfortunately I have to mention that in the camps in Auschwitz and Birkenau, Mengele's name was Angel of Death.
Yes, he was referred to as the Angel of Death. Absolutely.
He was never called anything else but Angel of Death.
Yep. He definitely was referred to as the Angel of Death because he was the one when the trains were unloaded to decide whether people would live and go become slaves, in effect, or whether they would be immediately sent to the gas chambers. Chris.
Yeah, I was wondering, throughout this whole discussion, we've been using the word soul in the way that in my Christian upbringing is kind of also the Greek way of understanding a soul is just like a spirit version of yourself. But it was my understanding that the Hebrew word nefesh is kind of more just your personality and more like an earthly, the conscience and consciousness part of yourself. Am I misunderstanding that Hebrew?
No, you're not. So let me comment. The Hebrew word nefesh in biblical Hebrew simply means life, a living being. It doesn't have anything to do with the part of you that survives death. When the mystics start writing about what happens after you die, they start using this word nefesh. And then they actually have, at first, 3 words for soul: nefesh, neshama, and I don't remember the third one. Okay, so actually,
is in Ruach.
Yeah, Ruach is one of them. So I'm actually going to quickly do another share screen. This is something we actually looked at last week. So, and I'm not going to, read it, but in Kabbalah, they actually talk about 5 different levels of the soul. So nefesh is what survives your death. And then at a higher level of the soul, you have just the names, Ruach, which also means spirit or wind, is the next level. At the next level is Neshama, which is related to the word for nefesh. No, I don't know. No, and maybe it's not related to the word for nefesh. And then Chaya is a higher level of the soul. And then the highest level of the soul is Yechida. So the mystics are going to get focused on, you know, on soul theory. But generally, I would say when I've used the term soul, and when the texts that we're reading use the word soul, they're talking about the part of you which is non-physical, which survives your death. And then there's all kinds of ideas about what happens to that. But, you know, but we say even in English, the person has a good soul. It's a common Yiddish expression, a gute neshama. And we say even in English, the person has an old soul. So, and in that sense, they're talking sort of about an inner spirit. So, you know, I don't think these terms are necessarily used with great precision. And then there's even theories about, you know, animals have a certain level of soul, and non-Jews have a certain level of soul, and Jews even have a higher level of soul. This is actually a Hasidic tradition, which I find offensive, that non-Jews don't have the same level of soul as Jews do. But there's a lot of I would say, mystical speculation about these kinds of things. I don't know if that's helpful.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Sure. Would you say, if we were to just restrict it to the Tanakh, would you say that that's an accurate description of how they would use the word nefesh? Is more just your consciousness and kind of your earthly part of yourself, and not necessarily the part of you that lasts after death?
The Tanakh, the Bible, has almost no speculation about what happens to you after you die. And, you know, in the Garden of Eden, it says, God breathed the breath of life into the man, and he became a living nefesh, basically a living person. It's something alive. So the Bible has very little speculation about an afterlife. They describe something as Sheol, which is related to the word Sheolah, which in Hebrew means question, so we're not sure what it is. And there's a discussion of things going down to Sheol, that when a person dies, they go down to Sheol, and it's a dreary place. It's not described as a place of punishment. It is mentioned in the Bible in the stories of King Saul that they raised the ghost of Samuel, his prophet, up from Sheol. And, you know, Jacob occasionally says, well, if any more of my sons are killed, you know, I will go down to Sheol in tears. So there's some reference to a place that is down, not up, but it's not, there's no discussion, at least in the Hebrew Bible, that it's your soul that goes down there. Not a lot about the afterlife in the Hebrew Bible. Bryce. Hold on, Bryce, and then Erwin.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the soul being cleansed and being ready to, you know, be born again into a new life and so forth, and it's been completely cleansed and it's a new soul again.
A cleansed
Why
soul.
on earth should I care?
Why should you care?
Yes, because and here's my thought. If I lost every memory that I have, and all I am is someone that just looks at things that goes, what's that? What's that? What's that? Okay. Who am I? All right. Do I, you know, if I don't remember what I've done or who I am and what my aspirations are, if all of that is stripped from me and all that is left is a life force with no meanness to it, why do I, the meanness with the memories, care?
So what I would say is, many would find this idea comforting. Actually, Sonia just today was telling me about a friend of hers who lost a child, and they had a funeral. This is Christian, and there was a lot of discussion in that the funeral, that the child now is in the arms of Jesus, in the arms of God, and is being comforted, and everything is really okay, and everything is great. And that brings a lot of comfort. I would say the idea that when you die, you are reacquainted with family members, and that there is hope for you after you sin of going to a better existence, maybe coming back into the world. That's a reincarnation idea, or not going back in the world necessarily. That's a resurrection idea. You only go back in the world at the end of time, but you're kind of hanging out with God and the angels and studying Torah, and you're cleansed, and you're again with your family and friends. I find that a comforting idea. So I don't know why you should care, but that's why I would care about some of that. You're muted, Bryce. You're muted. Bryce, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I meant strictly with, I mean, as far as being able to like hang out with family and friends and even meet family that I never met before, going back
Right.
to how as far, the people I don't even care about. And, but being able to hang out and do all that kind of good stuff, that's far more palatable to me.
Right.
Than being nothing more than a life spark again, with nothing, with no memories, no self, no beingness, nothing other than go try again, you life spark.
Yes. Okay.
That doesn't give me a comfort at all.
Okay. So what I would say is, first, I talk about this at every funeral, and I talk about the idea of reincarnation, and I talk about the idea, which we didn't discuss here, which is taught in these Kabbalistic texts, and it's also part of Hinduism and Buddhism, and that is groups of souls hang out together in different incarnations. So in one incarnation, they may be husband and wife, and the next one, they may be brother and sister, they may be teacher and student, they may be cousins, and so on. So I always say to this group, and I usually get a chuckle out of it, that I hope you all like each other, because if the mystics are right, you're destined to be in the same community gathered here today for eternity. And I find that a comforting thought. The other thought that I find not only comforting but fascinating is scientific investigations into prior lives. And I'm talking about, and if you want to read a book on this, it's a book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And the interesting thing there is using regression theory to get people to remember prior lives. And, on some level, that can be just pure fantasy. But what is interesting is when these people start speaking, medieval Spanish, or a Japanese woman in one of these books is speaking English, and she had no knowledge of English. So there's something going on. I don't know what exactly I believe, but I think there's more going on than meets the eye. And Sonia has had experiences of encountering dead relatives. And in one case, Sonia had the experience of her dead aunt looking for a womb to implant her soul in. And on the same night as Sonia had this experience in New York, Sonia's mother was visited by this same aunt, her sister, in Casablanca. And this was in the 70s, so there was no email and no chat. Guess what just happened to me? So there's something going on here. I'm a scientist, and I'm fascinated by mystical teachings. So I try and keep an open mind, and I do, and I find it comforting. It's sort of a question to Cheryl. What things you find comforting is sort of an interesting rush hour. We were talking about this. Actually, I had dinner with friends last night, and they were talking about whether they want to be cremated or buried, or now there's biodisposal. I guess it's
biocomposting.
Yes, it's composting. And I kind of surprised everyone by saying, I find the idea of being in a coffin and lowered into the earth and having earth spread over me comforting. And I think everybody was surprised by that.
No, one of my friends was talking about this last night, and she doesn't like the idea of earth being on her. She likes the idea of getting now going into a mausoleum where there's air conditioning and heat.
Yeah, what I call a filing cabinet.
Yeah, it's a filing cabinet.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
price of the filing cabinet depends on how high you are, so
Yeah.
your loved ones can see you at the right
Right,
level.
and there was
And-
I heard one story of a guy who was buried in Hollywood somewhere, and he wanted to be in the filing cabinet near Marilyn Monroe. I think it was the story, but anyway, you know, the only thing I can say is I've officiated about 600 funerals, so I have some experience with watching people being lowered into the ground and earth covering them, and I always remember my mother would found that thought horrifying, the sound of the earth hitting the coffin. She said she would sort of repeat to us that this was the worst thing in the world. And I must admit, whenever I hear that sound, I think of my mother's fear about that. But I
Yeah,
actually find, you know, being patted, you know, having all that earth on and patting it down, I always say it to me, it's like tucking someone in for their long sleep.
No,
But
I mean, and people, you know, even if you do the Jewish practice that it's supposed to be, have no metal, the coffin,
Right.
and, you know, plain, you leave this
Mhm.
world as you came in, it's the same for poor people, rich people. I mean, you know, there'll be conversations that people who really get into it, oh no, I've got to have, you know, a coffin that looks like this, and I want my head on a pillow, and you're dead. Would
I
you?
just read a story. No, I can't remember what I
Maybe
read
that's
this.
part of the denial.
Rabbi,
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Erwin. I'll tell the story just before we leave.
I have a question. Kabbalistically, I learned that when you know, the soul goes up wherever it goes, and the angels or God decides that you didn't finish your mission,
Mhm.
so he comes back down here. So what happens if the soul goes up and the soul is goes to Gehenna because he was a murderer, and it comes back to finish his job, to kill somebody more?
No, I mean, clearly that's not the idea. The idea is you're coming back to finish your task of doing good things in the world. I don't think
I would watch that movie though. It's a great movie idea.
Right. So there was a story. Now I remember it was, you know, there's a Facebook page for Reform rabbis, and somebody posted a question which has now gotten, I think, maybe 100 responses of funny rabbi stories that have happened to us rabbis, and I contributed one. But the one I just saw today was a rabbi's officiating at a funeral, and the family comes up and with the ashes of a dead pet, a dog, and wants to put the ashes in the coffin with the you know, with mom. And of course, in Jewish law, you would never do this for lots and lots of reasons, but we're Reform, and you know, my attitude is if the family finds it comforting, it's okay with me. And so after the funeral, the rabbi comments to the family, "Oh, your mom must have loved that dog." And they said, "No, she hated that dog." I love that story.
We're gonna make sure she spends eternity with it.
Exactly. And actually, the question comes up, you know, you've been married, divorced, and now remarried. Which spouse? Let's talk about a guy who has been married, divorced, and remarried. And the question is, with which spouse are you supposed to be buried next to? And the answer is the parent of your children. And I don't know the answer if you have children by various wives, but I've
What do we
I've
do?
had
Put half of you in one place, half of you in another place?
I don't, I'm sure that's not true, but I've explained that to people, some of whom were okay with that, some of whom, you know, would, let's say, unalterably opposed to that idea. Did not want to be buried to spouse number one. But, you know, there are Jewish traditions about this. Okay, it's after 8, so I will bid you all a good evening. I will mention in the note I will send out tonight, we are not having classes next week, not on Monday or Wednesday, because I am traveling. I'm actually going to Mexico for a wedding. And Robert, I don't know if you were waving goodbye or you had a question or a comment.
No, I'm just waving goodbye.
Okay, funny.
Bye.
Bye.
That's fine. You actually look like you're in the Blue Man routine. I don't know why. But funny, you don't look bluish. So good night, all. Yeah. I think it's because you're
It's the
being
backlight.
illuminated. Well, the backlight is fine. You're being illuminated by the blue light of your screen, at least
Yeah.
as it's being balanced. Okay. Good night. Good night, Julie.